Well, I wonder how you're doing. Are you all managing to stay sane? I know that for the extroverts among you, this isolation is particularly difficult, and by now you're probably climbing the walls, desperate to spend time with other people. Well, we introverts, we're secretly loving it. Well, maybe. Now, last time I spoke to you, I spoke about the book of Lamentations, that book of lament in the Old Testament. And I'd like to go back there today to share some more thoughts from this amazing little book. I want to show you something that's quite astonishing in a book of lament. First, do you remember that I said the book is a series of 5 poems? Each of the 5 chapters in our English translation represents one poem in the original. Now, we need to know about Hebrew poetry that structure is very important. It's every bit as important for Hebrew poetry as rhyme is for English poetry. The way we use rhyme today, they would have used structures. And each of these poems has a special structure. Each one is an acrostic poem. That is, successive lines begin with successive letters of the Hebrew alphabet to form a kind of alphabetized poem. You might be familiar with that from Psalm 119, which is probably the best known acrostic poem in the Bible, with a series of 8 verses for each letter in the Hebrew alphabet. Sadly, in our English translation, we completely lose that structure. There's no way of keeping it when you're translating from one language to another. But there's more to Lamentations, and this we can notice in our English translation, because these 5 poems are arranged in a particular order with reference to each other. There are 5 poems. 5 is an odd number, so one of these poems is at the center of the collection. And in Hebrew poetry and Hebrew writing, it will often be the thing that's at the center that is the most important, or the one that expresses the thought, the idea most clearly. So what we need to do is look at poem number 3, because poem number 3 is the central poem in this set of 5. And we read these words. I'm the man who's seen affliction under the rod of his wrath. He has driven and brought me into darkness without any light. Surely against me he turns his hand again and again the whole day. He's made my flesh and my skin waste away. Okay, Jeremiah, we've got the point. You're still lamenting. And so he is lamenting. It's a lament, a woeful writing. But look down to verse 22, and I think you'll see something quite amazing. These are verses that you may know. The steadfast love of the Lord never ceases. His mercies never come to an end. They're new every morning. Great is your faithfulness. The Lord is my portion, says my soul. Therefore, I will hope in him. Well, hang on. That's not lament, is it? Jeremiah, you're rejoicing. Right at the heart of a poem about lamenting, Jeremiah rejoices in the Lord. And that note of rejoicing goes right on down to verse 42 that you can read for yourself. A song of hope amidst the lamentation. In fact, at the centre of the poem, at the centre of the collection, at the centre of this song of hope, there's more. Look with me at verse 31. This is pretty much the middle verse of this poem, chapter 3, verse 31. For the Lord will not cast off forever, but though he causes grief, he will have compassion according to the abundance of his steadfast love. For he does not willingly afflict or grieve the children of men. Right at the centre of this poem, right at the centre of the section on joy in this poem, is a note about the compassion of God. God has compassion on his people. You see, this book teaches us that it's through suffering and struggle that we see God's compassion most clearly. It's through suffering and through struggle, just as we're facing now, that God's compassion comes through most clearly for those who want to see it. Now, when you get up each morning, especially in these days, when you get out of your bed, do you remember and give thanks to God for bringing you safely to the beginning of another day? Remember, God is merciful in giving you a new day. And remember that God is compassionate. He knows our sufferings. But that thought is for another day, because we're out of time now. I'll talk more about that probably next time. But for now, in all this suffering, remember this: the Lord will not cast off forever, but though he cause grief, he will have compassion, according to the abundance of his steadfast love. Let's bow our heads to pray. God our Father, thank you now again for your word and for these wonderful verses buried in places that we seldom look. Help us to remember that you are compassionate, that you are loving, that you do care for us. Help us to rejoice in your mercy and give thanks to you for your goodness. In your name we pray. Amen.